Ken Livingstone, the first speaker against the motion. Let's now move on to the second speaker for the motion, to Douglas Murray, Associate Director of the Interventionist Henry Jackson Society, a prolific journalist, writer, broadcaster, a vocal critic of the West's lack of will to confront ISIS. Douglas Murray, the floor is yours.
We've just been given one tour of history, and we could spend all evening giving different tours of the same history. Even those of us who have been in favour of interventions at times in the Balkans and in Iraq and Afghanistan may well have, and ought to, in my opinion, have, second thoughts on intervention and its utility on occasion. Syria, for me, is just such an occasion. It's been my belief for the almost 5 years now that the civil war there has been going on, that it is not in our gift or in our power, and I say our, I mean America or Britain or Western powers, to knit that country together. It is not in our gift. And if you believe the Pottery Barn rule, that if you break it, you own it, then we should be very careful not to help break Syria, because we don't want to own it. Now, having said all of that, what is different about this? What is a rationale for committing any troops, even the specialist multinational troops of the kind that General Allen and I are proposing tonight? What is the rationale for projecting those into Syrian territory? Well, it isn't hard to go through all of the terrible, bleak, nihilistic things that ISIS does and to find rationales in them, but I'm not going to do that. It is something that can be summed up in two individual places which should resonate in any hall like this here tonight. The first is Tunisia, the massacre of 30 British tourists on a beach enjoying their holiday, a cold-blooded and deliberate attempt on their lives for the crime of being on holiday, an act which ISIS has repeatedly attempted to carry out elsewhere. And the second name is Paris, because a group that plans and plots and carries out attacks like that on our friends, on people you know, on people we know, for being in a hall like this tonight, perhaps less well guarded, perhaps in London next time, perhaps a hall, children's age, perhaps a concert, perhaps a restaurant. That's why. Because ISIS alone of these groups at the moment not only says what it wants to do to people like you and people like me, but it is trying to do it. In the last few months alone, it has made repeated attempts, as the Prime Minister said recently, thwarted attempts to carry out such an attack here in the UK. When it happens, and I obviously, like everyone else, hope it does not, but when it happens, we will turn around and say, and look back at an evening like this and say, what the hell were we thinking of? Even wondering whether we ought to be crushing this group with everything at our disposal or not. What the hell were we thinking by even doubting it? Now, we have to be careful. Obviously, we have to be careful. ISIS is a millenarian, end-time theological group. There is no reason why we cannot be intelligent about this. Too, as General Allen, with his unparalleled experience, has already laid out, to be intelligent about this, to get a regional force if we can put it together, to try to make as large a coalition as possible, not to tell ISIS in advance what we are going to do, but to make the decision, to be resolute, and to make sure that a decision of all civilized people, led by us if it has to be, decides and then goes through with the act of snuffing this group out completely. Thank you.
Douglas Murray, the second speaker for the motion. Thank you. Let's now move to the second speaker against the motion, Rula Jibrail, half Palestinian, half Italian, born in Israel, and now one of the best-known voices from the region as a foreign policy analyst, journalist, novelist, and broadcaster. Welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm here tonight, actually, with a sense of déjà vu, because we're again lectured, with all due respect, by two white men who are telling us that we need another war in the Middle East, and we need to send your children, your loved ones, to die for a war that we know that we cannot win. These wars, as they sit side by side, by patronage, followed by unconditional support and empowerment of corrupt, abusive tyrant, whose abuse have helped foster mass radicalization across the region, and not now, for the last 4 decades. We backed Egypt, and we still back Egypt. What they give us, political Islam. The first person that was killed when millions of Syrians stood up demanding equality, democracy, and freedom, he was 13 years old. He was from a city called Daraa. The regime arrested him, tortured him, slashed his penis. They shot him with 3 bullets in the head. They returned him home. John F. Kennedy used to say, the president, when you make nonviolent revolutions impossible, what you're doing is you are making violent revolutions inevitable. This is what the Assad regime gave us, ladies and gentlemen. So what you will be doing, basically, sending people, troops on the ground in Raqqa, the capital of ISIS, knowing that there is a civil war, which no civil war in history has been solved with troops. Actually, in order to defeat ISIS in Syria, you have to address the Syrian issue. Tyranny and tyrant in the Middle East live in symbiosis. They galvanize each other, legitimize each other. Assad did a logical choice, in his case, and a strategic choice. While he was killing, in 2011, pro-democracy activists, cracking down on them on a daily basis, bombarding them, he did something else. He released hardcore jihadists. One of them was Allouche. He went on to become the leader of Jaish al-Islam. The guy that is not considered part of ISIS, but another group who's fighting, actually, sometimes ISIS, and promised that in case of, even if you eliminate ISIS, he will become ISIS 2.0, basically, another ISIS. For now, the overwhelming majority of Syrians don't see ISIS as their primary threat, because they see Assad as a major enemy. They will never fight ISIS until the 2 conditions are established on the ground: safety and justice. And I say that because I've seen over and over in the Middle East where we back these tyrants, they produce terrorism, and they force foreign interventions. It's time to interrupt this cycle. I just want you to know that General Petraeus, the guy that led the surge in Iraq, became the CIA. He opposed actually sending troops on the grounds, as President Obama, as every candidate on the Republican side, even the crazy ones like Donald Trump. There's a political process in place. There's talks in Geneva. Before we send, again, these troops like we did in Iraq and we did in Afghanistan. And by the way, there's 3,700 special troops already in Iraq. And there's 10,000 in Afghanistan. So I would like to know from John Allen, what is the number and which Western country will send? And I would like you also to ask General Allen, who led the coalition to counter ISIS, why did he fail to convince President Obama and Congress and the CIA? Were they pacifists? No. They just know a bad strategy when they see it. What can change the game on the ground for the first time? A genuine empowerment of people who, in 2011, after bin Laden was killed, went to the streets, millions, and demanded democracy, dignity, and a better life. Yes, history can go forward and backwards and sideways, but it always bends toward justice. Thank you.
So there, ladies and gentlemen, you've had the arguments for the motion and against the motion. How were you thinking when you came into this hall a short time ago? Well, most of you haven't made up your mind. You've come here to find out what the arguments are. 17% for, 16% against, 67% undecided. So both of you have a lot of work to do. We'll be reflecting on that later after you voted a second time. Let me open the floor now to those who want to contribute from the floor. There are microphones. Where are you, please, microphones? But General Allen, I need to ask you first of all, that challenge we've just heard from Rula Jibrayil, 3,200 troops already on the ground, true or false?
It's 3,700 Americans, and there are more other non-American European troops.
So boots are already there already?
That's right. The boots on the ground have been there for a long time, actually.
Sorry, in Syria too, there's 250 special forces.
That's right.
Well.
And secondly, the practical business. Your job was building a coalition. We heard from Ken Livingstone, you need to build a very broad coalition, and in doing that, you will get millions who can then counter ISIL. What's the problem building a coalition?
Well, Ken rightly pointed to a number of countries that are not in the coalition, but we've had conversations with them.
Does that mean they're in or out?
That means they're not in the coalition, but they're willing to help.
But that idea of millions joining a coalition in order to combat this evil threat?
Broadly, look, broadly, we're facing the globalization of the so-called caliphate. We need to get as much attention into the coalition as we possibly can and to the cause of countering the kind of extremism that Rula has talked about.
So, General Allen, you're actually saying globalization.
Let me finish.
That means they are in Syria, they are in Iraq, and they're in Libya. So you're telling these people that you would like to send troops also to these areas.
I didn't say that.
So what is the suggestion?
Let me finish.
Why would it be different?
We have to fight today because ISIS is coming for us. But we shouldn't have to fight forever. We have to fight to defend ourselves. That's the near battle that we have. And they're coming for us, and we need to be able to defend ourselves. But let me finish. But we have to be circumspect in what are the basic causal factors that have created the environment in which people feel they have no hope and are willing to blow themselves up because of that. It's not just a military battle up close. It's got to be a long-term strategy to try to resolve those causal factors that have created such a widespread radicalization that trend ultimately to extremist organizations. It's not a single proposal. It's not a single, let's fight them everywhere forever. I don't want to fight them everywhere forever. But we're going to have to fight to defend ourselves, and we're fighting right now.
Right. We can see the tension here up on the platform between both sides. Let me hear more. First there, second here.
I'm currently writing a book about Islam, and what I'd like to ask is, how is it possible to defeat the perception largely across the Middle East that the West is simply there to forward its own interests? How is that at all possible to move beyond that perception?
Rula, come back on that in a moment, but I want to get another couple of voices, and that lady there next.
I'd just like to...
Are you for or against, please?
Undecided. I'd like to ask Rula, I mean, certainly it's the first time I've heard it put, the case that actually it's the West who think they're fighting ISIS, where for the Syrians, they're